So what I'm going to talk to you today is really sort of the work that the DTRF has done in bringing together new drugs and new therapies and new people into this field that 15 years ago, there was really not much happening. In fact, even 10 years ago, I can say there's really not much happening at all. So how does the patient advocacy group such as DTRF really function in such a successful manner? So the first thing is the patient advocacy group itself plays multiple different roles. So previously I showed you that, there are thousands and thousands of scientists and patients and people all come together to try to come up with a new drug, say in colon cancer, or say a vaccine for COVID. But for rare diseases which are neglected, there's really only the patient advocacy group, such as DTRF, becomes sort of the keystone that brings all these different stakeholders together. So first and foremost, and the most important function of the Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation, really any patient advocacy group, is to provide support for patients. This is a isolating diagnosis. Family members, you really don't know other people who have desmoid tumors. So coming into DTRF, whether it's this meeting or the Facebook or any of the other virtual or non-virtual things, really immediately provides people a sense of relief, a sense of connection, a sense of togetherness, and that sense of isolation evaporates. So the number one function DTRF really does is, or really any patient advocacy does, is help support patients. And whether this is through just bringing people together or organizing events for fundraising, whatever it is, ultimately this is your organization where you can lean on to other people for support, no matter where you live, whether it's just in the United States or Canada, Europe, globally. This is ultimately an umbrella, a safe place for people to come to get answers and to search for answers as well. So that's the fundamentally most important thing. The second thing is, as I mentioned before, one of the most essential aspects of bringing new drugs or to bring a cure or treat better treatments for a disease is to start with basic research. So we want to understand, what is a desmoid tumor? How does it grow? What makes it grow? What triggers it? Why I had a great surgery, but why did it come back? These are fundamental basic questions that we need to understand in this space itself. Before DTRF, there were people certainly working on desmoid tumors. There were certainly scientists working on desmoid tumors, but there were very few, and they were definitely in silos. People would come out and present their work in small meetings, very high likelihood that the other person working desmoid tumors may not even be aware that somebody else is working on it. So what DTRF has really done over the last, at least for the last 10 years or so, is start bringing researchers together. So those people who had some interest, all the funds that you raised, the funds were provided to further accelerate their research, to say, here's a $50,000, here's $100,000, hire people to start working on these basic questions. And when they started putting these seed grants together, more and more people started coalescing around studying desmoid tumors. And researchers need money to do this research, to buy equipment, to answer their questions. And that's what Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation did. And all with your money that you've raised and through philanthropy and through other granting mechanisms, that money came together to support these researchers. And these researchers then invited other researchers to come in and start studying about desmoid tumors. And this is just in 2018, the number of different researchers from across the globe studying desmoid tumors. There are people who are studying at the very basic level at just the cells of desmoid tumors. And others are working on a mouse model. Others are working on frogs that grow desmoid tumors. All of this to understand, how does this start? Why does this start? How can we stop it? And so on and so forth. And right now, there are many, there are dozens of laboratories around the world where people are growing desmoid tumor cell lines from patients who give it through pattern.org or any other mechanism through their hospitals. There are people in Belgium who have now grown a frog that grows a desmoid tumor. Now they can put specific drugs to it, try to understand why does this frog develop a desmoid tumor. There are mouse models for desmoid tumors. All of this is to add towards the greater knowledge base of desmoid tumors itself. And this one, as I mentioned before, this is part of pattern.org, where you can sign up, and tissue that, if it is normally collected, can go to Broad, the institute, which is part of Harvard and MIT, where they are now growing these cells for basic science researchers such as Dr. Jesse Bohm and Moosh to work on figuring out the fundamentals of desmoid tumors itself. The next aspect of this is, yes, it's great to do all this basic research, but how do you take it to the next step? And frequently, scientists, they're very good at doing something at the very basic level of molecular biology, but they may not have the skill sets to take it to the next level to patients. So this is where Desmoid Tumor Foundation and the patient advocacy group has started engaging with people who are researchers and clinicians who treat patients to see how can we bring people who are in basic research and clinical research together so that what we learn in the lab can now be translated into the clinic, where things that appear promising can now be brought together. And more importantly, also for doctors who are treating patients with desmoid tumors. And these, remember, are very few patients to begin with. So one doctor may see 3 or 4 desmoid tumor patients in a year. But now when you bring 10, 20, 30 doctors together, it really starts multiplying. The knowledge starts really magnifying, and it's an exponential growth of what happens. And here's an example of how DTRF really collaborated with the European desmoid tumor and rare disease groups and many different foundations to bring together desmoid tumor surgeons, pathologists, radiation oncologists, medical oncologists together to say, can we all agree on how we should be managing desmoid tumors? When is it safe to observe? When is it okay to do surgery? When is it not okay to do surgery? When should you start a drug? Should you do radiation or not? So all of these people came together to agree in writing together this, what's known as a global consensus paper. And these are people from Japan and Europe and the United States and Canada coming together to say, let's agree on how to treat this. Not that, this is not a mandate, but a general guidance in terms of how we should be thinking about these diseases. And Desmoid Tumor, the foundation itself, also partnered with another organization known as the National Organization for Rare Diseases to say, can you include desmoid tumors as part of your registry to see how does a patient do from the time that they're diagnosed to the time that they have to start surgery or chemotherapy or maybe nothing, or just observation. So this is a natural history study where now there are 1,500 people, and Dr. Kelly Mercier, who is part of DTRF, has spearheaded this effort. And I know many of you are already participating in this study. So here's an example of how Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation engaged me. So almost 10 years ago, I had found in my clinic that this drug sorafenib seems to work. And here was a young man who was 35 years old with a desmoid tumor. He had failed all chemotherapies. He's had multiple other things, radiation. And the surgeon said, the only way we can really deal with your pain and all these issues is with an amputation of the arm. And the young man was frightened and did not want to take that option at all. He saw me in my clinic, and we said, well, why don't we try this drug sorafenib? We really didn't know much about it at all, and we did. And he had a really nice response. And you can see this on one side, it's bright white, and the other side, it's completely burnt out. And at that time, we published this paper, about 25 patients. It looked promising. We published it in a nice journal. And as a researcher, I was ready to move on to other diseases or other things or whatever was on my plate at that time. It was at that moment that Jeannie and Marlene came to me and they said, you know, we read your paper. It looks really promising. Can we get an FDA approval for this drug? And in many ways, it was a very naive question for them to ask, because the short answer is absolutely not. You cannot take a study like this that was done in a small clinic by, you know, a few people with a few patients and take it into the market. But it was out of their naive question that made me think, well, you know what, maybe we should work on taking this to the next step. And I can honestly tell you that were it not for the Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation advocacy, I don't think this paper would have really gone on to the next steps. And it's really with their funding to fund some of the correlative work and a lot of the pushing and the urging and and really saying, look, we really need something for our patients, that led us to, you know, two years of planning led to a phase 3 study. And this was an international study in US and Canada with hundreds of sites that were open. And we said, well, let's study this drug sorafenib, and we did. And one of the first things that the people who thought it was impossible to do a research in rare cancers such as desmoid tumors, they said, you know, it's too rare. You're not going to find the patients. You're not going to be able to enroll all patients in time. And the Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation really came through. And they said, no, you know, we will inform our patients about this study, and people became aware of it by word of mouth, through internet, through the DTRF website. And we set an incredible record in accruing patients to this huge phase 3 clinical trial. People thought it's going to take 5 years to do it. The study was completed in just about 17 months or so. And it was really the power of patient advocacy that helped even envision and complete this phase 3 clinical trial. And we, of course, published this in a nice journal, and now we're thinking about how to take it to the next steps. And there are other drugs. For example, you know, you'll hear from Dr. Cunningham later on. This is the beta-catenin inhibitor, which is a phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial that is going on. When this drug first came about, they did not, the company, I can tell you, did not come to any of the clinicians. They did not come to the scientists to say, you know, we're interested in this drug, how can we do it? They actually went straight to Marlene and Jeannie. It was really Marlene and Jeannie's introduction and putting them in link with this bigger infrastructure and community that this patient advocacy has built, that gave companies like Iterion or SpringWorks the confidence that they have the knowledge base, they have the experts, they have the patients to bring together new drugs into the market. And this drug, you know, from SpringWorks, you'll hear Mary Smith talk about this shortly. You know, this was a phase 3 clinical trial that was complete. But most of you will not know that this was originally a drug made by Pfizer. And Pfizer had tried this on many patients in big, larger clinical trials with cancer patients, and found that, you know, it was not helpful in, say, breast cancer or lung cancer, pancreatic cancer. And they'd actually shelved this drug. They had no intent on developing this drug at all. It was basically put away. It was a lot of urging by the Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation, by Dr. Bob Mackey, who's now at Penn, who's really an advocate to take this drug from Pfizer and bring it out and bring it into desmoid tumors. Were it not for the patient advocacy groups urging, this whole thing would not have happened at all. So it was a lot of behind the scenes pushing to come to this place. And just earlier this week, this same drug, nirogacestat, or the gamma secretase inhibitor from SpringWorks, is also available for children through the Children's Oncology Group across the United States. So a lot of this, again, by Dr. Aaron Wise and others here who have pushed for this. And on one end, you know, engaging, so we've talked about basic research, clinical research, doing new clinical trials, engaging. But the other key component is also engaging with the regulatory agencies such as the FDA. So here, when I did that study with sorafenib in the phase 3, one of the questions that came up in our conversation with the FDA is, you know, we are measuring how tumors shrink, but can we measure how patients feel. How can we take that into account? Does sorafenib make your pain improve? Does it make your mobility improve? And at that point, we did not have the right tools or the right questionnaires to answer that question for desmoid tumor patients to use as part of the clinical trial. So Marlene and Jeannie really organized a conversation with the FDA and brought people who are experts in this field and successfully came up with a questionnaire when a lot of people, even experts in the field, said that this could not be done, that such a questionnaire cannot be developed. And we went ahead and did it. And this is Dr. Jean Patey, who is an expert in patient advisory group and is also part of the medical advisory board, who heard the story of desmoid tumors, who heard the story of the patient advocacy group, who was so, he was so impressed with the passion that the patient advocacy group brought, that he really did a lot of this work at half the price at what they normally charge at. So it's really sort of the power of patient advocacy group to bring all these people together. And what's nice is that with this new questionnaire, we've now put it back into some of these major clinical trials, such as the SpringWorks trial, the Iterion trial, the pediatrics trial, to ask the question, yes, your tumors shrink, but do you also feel better? And this is one of the questionnaires that will help answer that essential element of the research as well. And the last part is, all of this is happening, but how do you also keep this momentum going forward? How do you keep this knowledge dissemination happening? And again, the patient advocacy group, DTRF, has brought together like all these experts together. So this is a meeting of patients in 2007 in a small room in a small hotel. And this is in 2018. Hundreds of people are now participating. And similarly, this is the late Dr. Dina Leb, who was one of the earliest and most serious researcher in desmoid tumors in 2007, speaking the only sole single speaker in 2007 from the scientific community. And this is in 2018. All the new researchers, clinicians, everybody have come together. And this was from yesterday. And this is only one of 3 pages screenshot that Lynn captured yesterday. So you can see sort of how this is all building towards a critical mass. And again, Marlene and Lynn and Jeannie have really, every time there is a paper that is published in desmoid tumors, they scour the internet, they bring the best high quality paper together so that all of you can read it and all of us can also refer to this one single central bank of knowledge base. So 10 years ago, or even 5 or 6 years ago, if someone had asked me that if you have a rare cancer or a rare disease, what do you need? I think most people, including myself, would have said money. We would have said, you need money, you need a lot of money to move the field forward. But now I don't believe it's money. And I think there is a tendency in society to say, if there's a problem, we just need to put a lot of money in it. But I think what I've learned in my involvement with DTRF, as well as other patient advocacy groups that are highly, highly successful, is that you want to build a critical mass. Critical mass, building together critical mass is really the first, second, and the third most important thing that a patient advocacy group can do to advance that field. And this involves bringing patients, to bring researchers, scientists, pharma, industry, knowledge base, everything together in one place so that we can learn from each other and we can take this to the next step. And it's out of this synergy that we can do high-risk projects, out-of-box thinking to really drive that innovation. And funding generally, in my opinion, follows. When people see that there is a critical mass, somehow they have confidence that this organization will get the job done. And then industry comes together and becomes sort of this great cycle that just keeps going on and on. And yesterday, looking at the research meeting, I really felt that we've come a long, long way, and we've really come together to form this critical mass of all the people necessary to move the field forward. So in conclusion, the power of patient advocacy in rare diseases is to organize. So it's to build critical mass, spread the word, and go global. And then to have a common goal. And the most important goal, I think, is to refuse to accept the status quo and to keep pushing forward for better things, to go for a cure, or to go for something that is really transformational and paradigm shifting. And then to unite. All of us need to come together, scientists, social workers, industry, developers, nurses, all of us patients have to come together in this common goal and mission. And of course, to improve the knowledge, diagnosis, treatments, and quality of life. And lastly, to support each other, patients, doctors, caregivers worldwide to do that.